tonight, before we do anything else, here's what I need us to do. You guys have so much energy, but what I need this energy to do is not to get disengaged. I need you to use this energy to lock in tonight. Everyone say lock in.
Lock in.
That's right. So you guys that are here, your energy, I can feel it. I can feel the energy in the room. So I got to make sure you guys are using that constructively, that you're using that productively. But before we jump into the message, what I need us to do is to lock in, to be quiet, and check out this bumper video about this new series we're in known as Live Different.
Hey, listen, did you change something? Something seems different about you.
No, same as always.
Okay. You know, if there is something different, you can tell me, right?
Nothing's different, I swear. Everything's the same.
Okay, you had to have changed something about you.
No, Danny, I'm trying to work. Nothing's different.
But just something's off.
No, I promise, everything's the same.
Okay, come on, something's different.
No, Danny, I'm the same as I always am. Nothing's different.
Whatever. Seriously, come on, Alyssa.
Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Alyssa, come on.
Danny, nothing is different.
Okay, Alyssa, I guess there's nothing different.
Oh wait, I just remembered. I love Jesus. That's why
Cut it off.
Can we give it up for our student leaders that helped make that guys? If we have never met before, my name is Caleb. I'm the middle school pastor. So, a part of my job, a bit of what I do every single week, is I get to explain the what, why, and how of being a Jesus follower. And I get to cast culture and keep guarding the culture of who we are as Campus Youth. But before we go any further, here's what I want. I want to make sure that this week we are locked in. If you notice, ladies, a lot of the time you guys are incredibly respectful. A lot of the time you guys are very locked in. It's not as much of you that I have to talk to. So for my gentlemen over here, just to address this, I want to make sure that you guys are focused. You guys are engaged. I want to call you to a higher standard. If you want to help lead the room in focusing, that's great. If you want to help lead the room in the chaos, then we can have a totally different conversation. But that means during the message, you're not touching each other, you're keeping your hands to yourself, you're not talking to one another, you guys are locked in. Because this message tonight is for you, not just you boys, but girls, this message is for you. This is a night where the message can have such a deep impact, such a deep meaning, that it can genuinely affect the way that you live your life. But if you're not willing to engage and to lock in with what's happening, then how do you expect to be listening to what God's trying to tell you? So before we go any further, let's pray, just to make sure we start off our night correct. So with every eye closed, every head bowed, God, we thank you for today. We thank you just for this incredible opportunity for us to come together to experience you in a new way, in a fresh way. Father, tonight we pray that you would find us in our moments. We'd find us in where we're at. God, in the life that we're living, in the things that we're doing, would you allow us to live differently than how the world lives, to live set apart from everyone around us who doesn't follow you. So we pray that you continue to speak to us and through us for the entirety of tonight. We thank you and we love you. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen. Well, like I said this week, so for my seventh grade boys, this is you guys I'm referring to when I talked about locking in earlier. So as you know, this last couple weeks we have been in a series known as Live Different. Everyone say Live Different.
Live different.
That's right. We get a chance to live different than how the world lives. Last week we had a guest speaker. We had our man Aiden, and even though he's not here tonight, can we give it up for our man Aiden who just did If you guys missed it, Aiden laid out such a great explanation of where we're going, what we're doing, how are we called to live differently than how the world lives. It's laid out very clearly in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. It says, don't copy the behavior and customs of the world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. In other words, don't copy the world. Now, a lot of the time, the world has this expectation for how we're supposed to live, what we're supposed to do. And in the meantime, we kind of have these different expectations for how we are supposed to live as Jesus followers. One of those major things that we talk about, it's not just for people in church, but it's something that with us as Jesus followers, we really, really, really need to have a strong hold on, is living with boundaries. Everyone say boundaries.
Boundaries.
That's right. Well, to talk about this, I figured the best way to describe this is from a story from like 4 years ago. You see, a couple of years ago, me and my roommates, we were all in Canvas College. We moved here, we did school here at Canvas College. I actually graduated from here. It's a fully accredited degree, so shout out you guys in about 6 years in the future. But you see, I'm there and we are going to our Columbia Falls campus to go do homework. It's like me, the other Caleb that's in here a lot, believe it or not, a third Caleb, and you'll never guess what the fourth guy's name was. It's actually Zach. But so what happened is we went and we were like, let's go to the Columbia Falls campus and let's do our homework. We just want to do change of scenery, change of pace, change of location. Let's do what we gotta do. So we get there, and as we're getting there, the third Caleb, for short I'll call him Zeddy, because that's his last name is Caleb Zedwick. Our man Zeddy is from Washington. He grew up outside of Seattle, so he's used to locking his car. You even look at your car wrong in Seattle and someone stole your exhaust, your catalytic converter. Or in Seattle, you leave your car unlocked, anything you had in there's probably gone, right? So he's used to living in Seattle, and he moved to Montana, and he's like, dude, I don't have to worry about locking my car because people from Montana are so nice. Anybody's parents religiously lock their car? You make sure every single day you get out, lock your door. Oh, you're about to undo it. Even if you're walking from your house to your car, it's lock your, yeah. That's how my parents were. So he's like, no, I don't have to worry about it because people from Montana are so nice. They never steal stuff. I'm like, that's so wrong. But he's there and he looks in, and our man Zeddy left his wallet in the glove box of his car. So we think nothing of it. He's like, oh, I'll grab it later. Leaves it there. We walk in, we do our homework. We're sitting down, we're just cranking out these papers. We have a 10-page paper to write by midnight. It's 11:55, so we're really hauling, right? And we're going as fast as we can, and we're finally we're done. Let's go to God's second promised land, Taco Bell, after midnight. That's just such a magical and wonderful experience. We're let's go to Taco Bell, and it's going to be great. So we go out there, and when we get over to the car, we look in, and the light on the inside is on, and we're like, well, that's weird. Did somebody just not shut their door? And one of the other doors was kind of cracked open. And we're like, dude, who didn't lock their, who didn't close their door? And we start pointing fingers, and we get in there, and we look, and his middle console thing was open. And a bunch of his receipts and quarters and stuff was gone. We're like, that's weird. And he had this Bluetooth adapter and a wireless charger mounted on his vent clip, gone. We're like, what? We look in the glove box. His wallet, gone. Our man did not lock his car, so because of that, his wallet got stolen. His wallet got stolen because he refused to do something so simple that protected him in the long run. You see, it's such a fun little story. It's something that's happened multiple times to him, actually. He left his car unlocked, and one morning some guy got in there and stole all of his construction tools. Or there's all these things that happen because of a boundary and a place that he forgot, he neglected to do. A lot of the time, we talk about boundaries, and it's always a list of do not do this, I will not go here, I will not do this thing, I won't do this, I can't do this. And it's always these things that we have in our life that we lay out for what these boundaries are. But boundaries are not meant to be this boa constrictor of restrictions around us, holding us tight so we can't move or do anything. You see, what boundaries are meant to do is boundaries are meant to give us a new sense of freedom, a new sense of fulfillment, a new sense of what it is that we are supposed to do. But through that, through the boundaries we have in our life, we are allowed to see things differently. But today, as we talk about boundaries, there's somebody who we talk about all the time in the Bible with breaking boundaries. Breaking boundaries. Our man who we think of most of the time when we talk about breaking boundaries, he's this dude by the name of Samson. Everyone say Samson.
Samson.
Now, a little bit of context if you have no idea who Samson is. Number one, he was an Israelite, so he was there. He was just part of God's chosen people. And what would happen is, Samson was a judge. And when I say judge, I don't mean like the long curly hair, the long fluffy wigs. I don't mean like the gavel banging on the table that's like order. Like, he's not a judge like that. Back in the Bible, there was this cycle of dysfunction. There's a cycle, we call it the judges cycle, where the Israelites, God's chosen people, would be delivered out of slavery. And they're like, God, you're so good. We love you so much. We're never going to worship anybody else. And then a couple hundred years later, something like funky would happen. They'd have like a bad year for their crops, and they'd be like, maybe it's because we're not worshiping the right God. We worship this other God instead. And God's like, yo, what? What did you just... So what happened is God would send another nation to send the Israelites and put them in captivity. And then while they were in captivity, it would be a moment to reflect and learn like, oh, we have a God that cares about us, a God that sees us, right? And God would send judges to go in and rescue them. The judges were basically like the Avengers. They were these super cool, a lot of the time super jacked people. If you ever want a good story, go through the story of Judges and read the book and get to the point where it talks about Ehud. That's a whole separate story we can talk about later. But in the story of Judges, we finally get to the last judge mentioned in the Bible, and it's our man Samson. He was the last judge mentioned in the book, and through that, Samson was like crazy, crazy, crazy strong. Like I'm talking about ripped. He doesn't have a 6-pack, he doesn't have an 8-pack. Bro's got like a 42-pack. Like he's ripped out of his mind. He's super strong. Like imagine if Captain America and Thor were combined and then just stronger and bigger. Like he is such an insanely strong guy. And then, beyond that, he was an incredible warrior. In order to protect the Israelites, to protect the people against the other nations that were coming to attack them, what would happen is he would have to defend them. He's such a great warrior that as a matter of fact, he killed, and this was mentioned in there, he killed 1,000 men in an army with a donkey's jawbone. Like he was getting swarmed. He looked down and was like, what's this? Like, donkey skull. He grabs it and starts to swing him like he's fighting back. Like he killed 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone. He's that much of a crazy and brutal warrior. But he didn't just have this strength naturally. It wasn't just one where, he was like, he woke up one day and he's like, I'm so strong. But Samson had a bunch of boundaries he had to have. It's called the Nazirite vow. It's a little bit of an older term. A Nazirite vow was essentially these 3 main components. Number 1, they had to avoid wine or any strong drinks, like any kind of alcohol. They couldn't drink whatsoever. They had to avoid contact with dead bodies. So for example, if Samson was the guy like tearing up the battlefield, leaving bodies left and right, he couldn't be the one to drag them off the battlefield. Let's say they went out hunting and they like shot an antelope or something in the wilderness, he couldn't be the one dragging it back to their camp. And it just goes on and on for like all those things. And the last thing is Samson had to refrain from cutting his hair. Like our man Zach Hedman has to refrain from cutting his hair. Because what would happen is, if Samson broke any 3 of these vows, Samson would lose his strength. He would lose this blessing that God's given him. So in the same way if Zach cut his hair, Zach would like forget how to drum basically, because he's just such a killer drummer, but he would like totally lose the ability. So Zach, never cut your hair. Do you guys agree Zach should never cut his hair?
Agreed.
But you see what happened was, he had all of these things, he had all of these boundaries, all of these lines he wasn't supposed to cross, or his strength would leave him. But time and time and time again, Samson would cross these boundaries. And I could go through the whole story of Samson. It's like multiple chapters long in the Bible, but I don't want to break it down detail by detail. Samson would cross boundaries time and time and time and time again. And it eventually led to his downfall. We'll read more about that later, but later on it says that the strength of the Lord had left him. But boundaries aren't there. Like I said, boundaries weren't created for us to have these like super tight and constricting like profiles on our life. Samson didn't have these boundaries to say, no, Samson, you're not allowed to drink and have fun at a party. It wasn't there to say, no, Samson, you can't, do these things with people. It wasn't there to like do all these things that Samson can view as fun. Boundaries were meant to make sure that we are never getting away from what God is calling us to do, from the people He's calling us to be, from acting right in God's eyes with what we do. A lot of the times, if you think about like boundaries, think about it like guardrails, right? Like anybody gone up Big Mountain before? like big mountain, or you've seen like going to the Sun Road, like those, crusty like rock walls kind of along the whole edge. Now, if you notice, when you guys are there, when you're driving, the closer you get to the guardrails, the more like on edge you feel, right? Like, let's say you're with your older sibling and they're driving and they're cranking it like 90 degrees around a corner, and you see it and you're like this far away from the guardrail. You're like, if we clip this, I'm dead. That's what boundaries are like for us. We're not supposed to get as close as possible to the boundaries. What we're supposed to do is get as far away from them as we possibly can. You see, boundaries give us a little different direction. They protect us and they guide us. In Psalms 119, verse 9, it asks the question, how can a young person stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word. In other words, how can we stay right on the path of purity? We have to stay pure according to the boundaries, to the statements, to the things that we've set in place that keep us from going places we shouldn't go. You see, in Judges chapter 14, verse 5, it talks about how Samson violated one of these boundaries. It says that Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, this area they were in, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came towards him roaring, which is like crazy. Like, imagine getting charged by a grizzly in Glacier Park. Like, it's that same energy. We keep reading on in verse 6. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him because of that immense strength he had. It wasn't his, it was God's. And although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces as one tore a young goat. And hold up, pause. Sometimes the Bible, like if you ever read the Bible and you think the Bible's a PG book, the Bible's like PG-13, like crazy. Like, they go ham with some stuff. But notice how like casual they mention like one tears a goat. Like, anybody just ripped apart a goat before? No, you haven't, you liars. But like, imagine the strength required to do that, not just with like a goat or a young goat. Imagine a giant like African lion charging at you and you rip it in half. That's how strong Samson was. And in that moment, he used it to defend his family. We keep reading on in verse 6. He tore a young goat, but he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. And just to summarize the next little bit, the next day, as Samson is walking back, he's walking by the same area, and he looks at this lion on the ground, and he sees these bees have made their home. They made some honey. Like, they made a little beehive in it, which is kind of weird. I didn't know bees, lived inside of lions. It's weird. But, they made their home. They made like a beehive there. And Samson saw it, and he saw the honey, and he's like, you know what? Yeah, I'm taking this. And he saw it, he looks down, and he scoops up the honey, and then he brings it home for everybody. Like, number one, imagine like seeing a dead lion and some honey, and you're like, yeah, I'll take the honey. Number one, weird. Number two, he brought it home to his family, and they like ate it there. That's like so weird. It's so weird, but in that moment, he directly violated the Nazirite vow, his commitment that he had to not do these things. Think about the places that we go. Think about the things that we do on the day-to-day basis where we shouldn't be going. You see, Samson knew that there was a dead lion on that path, and yet he still continued to walk as close as he possibly could to the dead lion. And what that eventually did is that caused him to break a boundary. Later on in the stories, we understand that he's not supposed to cut his hair. He lets this woman know that he cuts his hair, and he loses his strength, and so she cut his hair in the middle of the night, and he lost his strength. But notice how he kept getting closer and closer and closer to the lion. He knew what he shouldn't be doing. He knew where he wasn't supposed to go. In the same boat, you guys know where you're not supposed to go. You guys know where you're not supposed to go, what you're not supposed to do. And in that same sense, how often do we break those boundaries? How often do we go to those websites we know we shouldn't go to? How often do we look at those pictures we know we shouldn't look at? How often do we send those pictures we shouldn't send? How often do we act the ways we shouldn't act? How often do we talk the ways we know we shouldn't talk and say the things we shouldn't say? How often do we have these artificial boundaries or lack thereof and automatically cross them? Imagine the places you go, you're getting so close to the line that you cross it, that you understand the boundary broken. Imagine, in that same boat, imagine going to those sites. Imagine listening to that music. Imagine talking and acting that way and Jesus was in the room with you. Because he is. But boundaries aren't meant to constrict us. It's not meant to bind us down, to stop us from doing what we want to do. What boundaries are meant to do is to give us a new sense of freedom. You see, boundaries lead to freedom. And it may seem ironic, but there's actually greater freedom in living with boundaries. I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever been like in the mountains on a road and you're like I talked about going up a big mountain, imagine the edges of the cliff there in the middle of the winter and there's no guardrails. You don't know where the edge of the road is. You don't know how sharp this turn is. You don't know when you're supposed to stop. You don't know all these things. And if you're not careful, you can go off the edge. In our lives, we can get so close to the line, we can get so close to what it is that we go over the edge. We say, well, it's not that bad. It's not like Aiden talked about last week. It's not like I'm the one, smoking weed, but I'm just vaping a little bit. It's not as bad. Oh, I mean, like I have a couple drinks here and there when my parents aren't there, but I'm not getting drunk, so it's okay, right? And we get so close to the line that eventually, if we don't have those guardrails, if we don't have those boundaries put in place, we go over the edge. That's just the HVAC system. You guys can ignore that. You see, boundaries lead to freedom. And without boundaries, we fall into destruction. Samson's life is such a prime example that when we live life without boundaries, we fall into destruction. You see, Samson had crossed the line. This vow that he had made, these promises he made, these boundaries that he was supposed to keep, he broke again and again and again and again. And it was in that moment we read in Judges 16:20 that he did not know that the Lord had left him. You guys can ignore the lights for a second. You guys can ignore that. Ignore that. You see, Samson knew that he wasn't supposed to go and do what he did. But life without boundaries is us being bound to a path of destruction. You see, in Proverbs 25:28, it says, a man without self-control, without boundaries in this sense, is like a city broken into and left without walls. There's no defense. There's nothing there to help you. Nothing to protect you against what's out there that wants to hurt you. You see, we have a moment to understand the boundaries in our life and to understand the freedom that we have with them. You see, because the boundaries in our life, like I said, they lead to freedom. They lead to a joy like never before. The boundaries that we have in our life are meant to give us so much hope and peace and clarity in how we live our life that there should never be a question. Back to the story of Eddie. He lived his life without the boundary in that sense, without the expectation of locking his car. And because of that, his wallet was stolen. If he just would have locked the car in the first place, that never would have happened. He never would have lost his wallet, his charger, his Bluetooth adapter, anything. In the same way, if we're not willing to put boundaries up in our life, we're willing to fall into destruction. To let our life come crumbling down around us because of everything that we've done, everything that leads us away from Him, but boundaries lead us towards Him. Going back to Romans 12:2, it says, don't conform to the ways of the world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then, you'll learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. I'm going to invite you guys across this room to stand to your feet. And this isn't a time to talk to our neighbor.